Hi, Nick Dogan, or say law. We safeguard your professional license so you can get back to business. Today's topic is what is a consent order from the General Contractors Board? There are actually two types of consent orders with the General Contracting Board in North Carolina. One is going to be in regards to somebody that is accused of doing unlicensed work, and then another one is going to stem from a licensee that has a complaint filed against them with the GC board in North Carolina. First, we're going to talk about the consent order in regards to the unlicensed work. I talked about it a good bit, the whole process in a different video where we go through the process for the unlicensed complaint. But just to touch on that a little bit, because it is relevant, and if you want to get a deeper dive into that, check out that other video that's on the YouTube channel for the firm. So with an unlicensed allegation, it goes through the board's process, and then eventually they will file with Wake County Superior Court a complaint for an injunction, trying to seek an injunction basically saying, a court order saying, like, you can't do this one thing anymore. So with a consent order, if you're like, all right, well, technically I was doing work $40,000 or more in labor and materials. I'm sorry, the job got out of hand. I ended up being 45,000 because materials ended up being 10,000 more than I thought. Sorry, and you want to resolve the matter with the GC board, you can enter into an agreement with them. That agreement is basically a consent order saying, like, yeah, I agree to allow this injunction to be put in place against me. And then I agree with these findings of fact, these conclusions of law, and then basically the outcome, which can or cannot include any sort of attorney's fees or court costs. Usually, if somebody's going to enter into a consent order, you want to get something in return, right? So with something like that, what you'd be shooting for is to get either no attorney's fees or the very, very, very bare minimum of attorney's fees, because they are allowed to ask for attorney's fees. And most of the time, especially if somebody doesn't participate, it's more likely than not that attorney's fees are going to be awarded. And then also, even if somebody does participate as a defendant and actually, does file a responsive pleading and then participate in the matter, and maybe that's by a consent order or they're contesting it, whatever the case may be, there's still a possibility that the judge may say, you know what, this is pretty clear cut. You've wasted a lot of people's times. We're going to agree with the attorney's fees. And then if you have contested it and dragged it out and you lose, there is that possibility that the judge says, hey, we're going to give full attorney's fees. And that could be expensive. That could be $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. And I'm willing to bet that the board's attorneys don't charge a cheap price. They probably charge a very high price. And so if it does get dragged out, but it's pretty obvious that, you were doing unlicensed work and it was $40,000 and above, and you're just dragging it out for the sake of dragging it out, then there's a higher probability you're gonna have to pay attorney's fees than if you say, you know what, I'm sorry, I did do this. Let me go ahead and get this resolved. You're probably going to be able to keep those attorney's fees down. And, maybe they legitimately have 1,500 or 2,000 worth of attorney's fees. You can negotiate with people and maybe you can get that down to a pretty reasonable, palatable amount versus going through the process, even though you might fully understand that you're at fault, and increasing those attorney's fees and making it worse, basically. So consent order just kind of, comes up with an agreement, puts that on the books, and that's a court order. Now, the thing with that is, don't do unlicensed work again, because then you would be in violation of that court order, that injunction. Okay, so that's a very, very, very important thing to understand, that if you do come into a consent order and get an injunction in place against you where it says you shall not do unlicensed work, $40,000 or more in the state of North Carolina, general contracting work, or advertised as such of doing being a licensed general contractor, and if you do, then you're in violation of that court order, and that's bad. So you want to be very, very, very careful what you enter into and the potential ramifications when you enter into them, okay? The other one in regards to consent orders is if you're licensed in North Carolina to do GC work and somebody files a complaint against you, and you either want to do two things. You're either All right. Well, yeah, I messed up. I did try to make it right with with the other party, and I thought I made it right with them, or I was trying to make it right with them. They just kept ignoring me, and they don't want to talk to me anymore. They just want to go through the board process. And you want to get it resolved, then you can get it resolved through a consent order. Now, that consent order is just going to be with the board. That's not in any sort of court because the board at that point has jurisdiction against you. So they handle that through themselves and through their process. They don't have to get a court involved or anything along those lines because they're dealing with a licensee and their job is to regulate that license and that profession. So the other thing is you could have a decent case and you can still enter into a consent order if you want. You can always have a hearing. You have a right to a hearing. I did a video a little bit about, why we all as licensed professionals have a right to a hearing. I would encourage you to check that out. But in regards to the consent order, if you feel like, you know what, this could go either way, I've got a couple witnesses, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to get them, or, hey, they have this witness and they don't like me very much, and I don't know what's going to come out of their mouths, and that could kind of be the tipping point in your case, and you're just kind of unsure that how it's going to go, then maybe a consent order is not a bad idea because a couple things. You have more control over the outcome. And if they're initially coming and they want a 6-month suspension of your license, you can come to them and go like, "Hey, I can't afford a suspension. That's going to torpedo my business. I got 7, 8 jobs going on right now, and I'm in the early stage of about 3 of them, or whatever the case may be. This could be a potential detriment to the general public. Can you work with me on no suspension?" You might be able to. We might be able to work something out as far as that's concerned, or you might be able to work out something like that as concerned. But you want that in paper, right? You don't want to just rely on somebody's word. So that's where a consent order can come in. So you be able to agree with what the findings of fact are. That's what led to the allegation and things like that. The conclusions of the law, what laws were applicable and violated, and then applicable in regards to the rule, and then what the proposed penalty would be in the administrative action that will be implemented against you as the licensee. So, the positive about the consent order is you have more control over the situation because you have to agree with it. You can't just, they just can't just do the consent order without you as the licensee's consent. It's not how it works. One of the negatives of it is, you're technically, when it comes to the board, in their eyes, at that point, you would have an administrative action against you. One of the positives with the GC board as of today, which is June 10th, 2025, they don't publish those on their website. So you could have a suspension and it's not going to be published on their website. You could have, a fine and a reprimand. It's not published on their website. Now, somebody could do a public records request if they know to do such, and they are likely to acquire that consent order there. So that's another negative as well. So there's a lot of things that go into this. So it's, again, not something to rush into. Their process is pretty lengthy. At the same time, you don't want to dilly-dally, but you don't want to rush into things. So there's a lot of nuance in this. That's why hiring a professional that practices this area of law and this area of law only is of the utmost importance because, people like myself, we can help you and go through the process, are very familiar with it, and help protect your license and your livelihood. So if you got any questions on this, check out my website. It's northstatelawfirm.com's website. And also, you're familiar with the YouTube channel because you're here, but North State Law is a YouTube channel. We got a lot of videos on this platform. So make sure to check out all those. And if you still can't find what you're looking for in either one of those spots, then please give my office a call or text 919-521-8810, and you'll get a free 15-minute discovery call with a member of my staff. Keep building North Carolina. I hope everybody has a fantastic day. Bye-bye.